Do you like comic books? Do you like horror movies? Action films? Hard rock? Heavy metal? Do you feel like maybe you can't enjoy those things because you're a Christian, or do you feel any kind of guilt because of that? Then you might be interested in what I'm calling dark Christianity. Some people might call it Gothic Christianity, but for the purposes of this video, I'm going to call it dark Christianity. Dark Christianity, or Gothic Christianity, is an aesthetic of art and entertainment that embraces the Gothic, spiritual warfare, reminders of death without the fear of death, and Jesus destroying the forces of evil. I think dark Christianity encompasses movies, comics, music, video games, and so much more. Welcome to Nazirite Media Real Talk, where I give you an unscripted and unfiltered deep dive into some of the conversations we couldn't cover in our main videos. This one is going to lose me a ton of subscribers, and I'm going to get a lot of hate for it in the comment section, because I know this is ultimately very controversial. So first, I want to start off with some Bible verses to help us understand what dark Christianity is and what dark Christianity isn't. We have to set some guidelines for ourselves as we go along that's biblical. Then I want to talk about some historical examples of what I would consider to be dark Christianity, and then we'll get into some modern examples of art, media, and entertainment that I think Christians can enjoy. I think a lot of you right out the gate are already thinking, doesn't dark Christianity sound like an oxymoron? How could Christianity be dark? There's nothing dark about Christianity. And to an extent, you're kind of right. Christianity is all about light. Here's John 1:5. And the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not comprehend it. At the end of the day, even if we enjoy having a darker aesthetic or a more Gothic aesthetic, it's important to always remember that Jesus will conquer evil in the end. Romans 16:19, for your obedience has become known to all, therefore I am glad on your behalf, but I want you to be wise in what is good and simple concerning evil. If you look at other translations of this verse, you get the sense that Paul is telling us that we need to be very knowledgeable about what's good, and we should not really concern ourselves much with evil. That's what he means by simple concerning evil. You shouldn't know a whole lot about evil. We want to be ultimately innocent of heart and innocent of mind at the end of the day. So you don't want to always preoccupy yourselves with evil things. And we never want to confuse good for evil or evil for good either. There's a lot of people in our modern day who are doing that, and that's explicitly condemned in Isaiah 5:20. Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness, who put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. There's a lot of stuff in our modern day that's downright evil that people are calling good, and people are even calling the good things evil. And so as Christians, it's important that we have wisdom and discernment to never ever do that. This is why whenever I make a video about movies, video games, or music, I'm always very careful to highlight the things that are good and the things that are bad in each one. I never want to make a blanket statement saying this movie is 100% perfectly good or this movie is 100% perfectly bad. Almost all movies, video games, and music has like a mix of both. There's usually problems in any given piece of entertainment unless it was created by Christians for Christians. And so for that reason, I have no problem calling a spade a spade. We need to be able to acknowledge what is good and what is evil and call these things out. And the last verse I want to share on this topic is Philippians 4:8. Finally, brethren, whatever things are true, whatever things are noble, whatever things are just, whatever things are pure, whatever things are lovely, whatever things are of good report, if there is any virtue and if there is anything praiseworthy, meditate on these things. A lot of well-meaning, good-intentioned Christians sent me this verse in the comment section of my Doom video. And their argument was effectively that Christians can't play Doom because Doom has demons in it, and we can only think about good things. I take issue with that. If you wanted to take a very literal reading of this verse, it would mean that no pastor or priest is ever able to talk about dark things that happen in their congregants' lives. There would be no confession booths. You would have no ability to walk up to your pastor or priest to tell them about some of the bad things that are happening in your life. Why? Well, because pastors and priests aren't allowed to think about anything but good things all the time. That's what a literal reading of this verse gets you. We all know that that's silly. Sometimes pastors and priests have to carry the burdens of their flock. And the Bible also calls us as Christians to carry each other's burdens. So if somebody comes to you and tells you about awful things that have happened to them recently or in the past, are you going to close your ears and say, oh no, Philippians 4:8 tells me I can only think about good things? That's not what Philippians 4:8 says. St. Paul is telling us to meditate on these things. These are the things that we need to take in to fill ourselves up with. And so that's why I think it's important, if we're going to talk about dark Christianity, we should never just focus on evil or just focus on the darkness. That's a horrible idea. We need to talk about how the light is overcoming darkness, how good is triumphing over evil. And that's what we're going to talk about as we move through this video. First off, I want to start off with some historical context so you can see that this didn't just emerge from a vacuum. Right out the gate, I would recommend doing research on the concept of Christus Victor. Christus Victor is a different way of understanding the atonement. It's effectively focusing on how Christ came and triumphed over evil and death. Christus Victor gives us a lot of cool artwork like this, where you see Jesus and he's standing over Satan, trampling him under his feet. Christus Victor focuses on how Jesus descended into hell during the harrowing of Hades, and he brought the saints out. I've talked about some of these things in my videos because you see a common theme in a lot of stories where the hero descends into the underworld to rescue those who are under there or to defeat the enemy who's there. It happened in Harry Potter, for instance. And all that is a very biblical concept. Moving on, we have the artwork of Gustave Doré. I think that Gustave Doré's art is some of the best, most respectful depictions of biblical stories that I've ever seen ever. This one is one of my favorite ones. It depicts David slaying Goliath and chopping off his head to hold triumphant above him. This is way different from those like David and Goliath, like children's Bible stories you've probably seen, or even that most recent movie that came out. If you read the biblical account, David brings the head of Goliath to Saul as proof of what he had done. He like carries the head around with him for a while. There's some pretty violent, evil, and dark things that happen all throughout Scripture. Gustave Doré, I think, does a great job depicting some of these things in a realistic and respectful light. Of course, the crucifixion is one of the most well-known, brutal examples of something that happens in the Bible. Here we have Michael casting out all of the fallen angels. I think Gustave Doré just does a really good job depicting spiritual warfare. Of course, we have the story of Samson. Samson was a mighty warrior. He slayed like 1,000 men with the jawbone of a donkey or something like that. Here we have him tearing apart a lion with his bare hands. And here's the scene of Samson's self-destruction where he breaks free and collapses the building down on top of everyone. Some of you may be familiar with the story of the Witch of Endor. In the Bible, King Saul goes to a witch so that he can effectively do a form of divination or necromancy where they try to raise, I think, the prophet Samuel out from the dead so they can speak to his ghost. So Saul contacts this witch so that he can do this evil practice. It's condemned in the Bible, but it's a really dark and creepy story. A lot of this kind of stuff is left out of children's Bibles and children's movies, but it happened. And if you just recently watched my Captain America video, you saw that I talked about King Nebuchadnezzar going mad and turning into an animal. There's this really weird scene in the Bible where King Nebuchadnezzar becomes like a beast of the fields. He like preys about and eats grass like an animal. It's almost like he turned into some kind of werewolf or Sasquatch type monster. He completely loses his humanity and he goes out into the wilderness. It's a bizarre story, but it's very similar to that of like a monster movie. I'm sharing all these things to prove the point that the Bible is full of a lot of really weird, violent, creepy, dark, and scary things. So the Bible is no stranger to horror, and if you want to read and study the Bible, you're going to encounter this stuff. And you have to know how to deal with it. A lot of the dark, creepy aesthetics that we know in our modern day ultimately stem from ancient Christian practice. Here's a Christian Orthodox monk on Mount Athos standing in front of a wall of skulls. These skulls are likely the skulls of saints. It's a common practice in ancient Christianity to hold on to these kind of relics. The skulls of monks who died while serving in a monastery. These are the skulls of saints. A lot of people would see this as dark and creepy. It kind of looks like Halloween decorations. But Christians honor and respect the dead. It's not just an Orthodox thing. Catholics do the same thing. If you look up Catholic relics, you'll often find skulls in boxes like this. Here's one. Here's another one. It's not unusual to keep the bones or the skulls of deceased saints. Some people might think this stuff is creepy, or again, it kind of looks like Halloween decorations, but this is the origin of a lot of that creepy, dark, Gothic stuff that we're talking about. Here's some more Orthodox relics. You see the Orthodox also have skulls in boxes like this. They keep the bones of saints like this. Another popular tradition with Christians is Memento Mori. Memento Mori was originally a Latin phrase that was said by the Romans, but Christianity, having come up out of the Roman Empire, they adopted that same phrase, Memento Mori, and the whole purpose of it is to remember that we're going to die. Memento Mori is a Latin phrase translated to remember you will die. A lot of the artwork that you'll find when it comes to Memento Mori are sometimes flowers, because flowers are beautiful and they wither away. You get skulls, which is a reminder of our death, and you have hourglasses, which are reminders that we're running out of time. Again, a lot of people would see stuff like this and think it's creepy or it's horror, but this is not at all a secular thing. Here's an image of what I think is St. Paul writing his epistles, and you have a skull right next to him. It's a constant reminder that we're going to die. And so from a Christian perspective, Memento Mori reminds us that we need to get right with God now. If you aren't right with God, you need to get right with God, because you never know when your time is going to come. And the last piece of historical evidence I want to use is Dante's Divine Comedy. In Dante's Divine Comedy, he tells a fictional story about traveling down into hell and then rising back up into, I believe, heaven. As a part of that story, more people, I think, are familiar with Dante's Inferno, which has him descending into different layers of hell until he eventually meets Lucifer down at the bottom of it. It's a very dark and creepy story, and of course, none of it's biblical, but it's just a reminder that all across Christian artwork, we always have had these stories of hell, demons, spiritual warfare, punishment, justice. And so these, to me, are the things that I think dark Christianity should focus on. So now let's get into movies. Let's talk about movies. I like some horror movies, but I don't like the gory or graphic or explicit horror movies. To me, I think that the best horror movies are psychological, and they focus on problems of the human condition, like sin, guilt, and trauma. I think as Christians, we need to recognize that the horror movie genre is very flawed. You'll find a lot of very explicit and evil things in the horror movie genre that we should try to avoid and stay away from. For instance, I think that Christians should avoid the Saw movies at any and all costs. I think movies like the Saw movies or the Terrifier movies, the Terrifier franchise, are things that we should avoid completely. There's a reason why the images are blurred when I go to search for it. These movies are just about senseless, gratuitous violence for no reason whatsoever. I think that we should be avoiding senseless and gratuitous violence, and some of these horror movies also have just explicit sexual content for no reason. We should avoid that kind of stuff like The Plague. I think it's much more interesting to focus on the horror of the human condition or spiritual warfare. And so some great examples of that include, of course, your classic Universal monster movies. I haven't seen all of the Universal monster movies, but I've seen like Wolfman, Frankenstein, Creature from the Black Lagoon, and the original Dracula. I think that these movies are great, and I think that you can learn great Christian lessons from these movies. You're not going to be exposing yourself to any graphic or explicit violence or sexual content by watching these movies, and these movies will challenge you to think about the human condition. They're going to make you think about sin and evil and how we can battle these things. As far as modern movies go, there aren't a whole lot of great modern movies, but there are some that I really like, although there are issues with these movies. One of my top picks is The Witch. The Witch is a horror movie about a young girl who slowly descends deeper into darker occult practice. She gets tempted by a witch to effectively become a witch herself. It's a creepy movie, and it is rated R because there are some things in here that are explicit, and so I don't recommend this movie for everybody, but it's ultimately a great story about clinging onto your Christian faith and how important that is. And when you let it go, some evil and dark crazy things can happen. She's raised in a Christian family, but she wants to break free from it. And as she's tempted more and more by Satan and more by this witch, she becomes a witch herself. And it's a really creepy movie. And it's a reminder that we should never go down that path. If you'd like for me to cover this movie in a future video, please leave a comment letting me know. And if you wanted me to cover any of those Universal monster movies, please leave a comment letting me know. Next up is a movie that was actually created by the same person who did The Witch. This movie is Nosferatu 2024. It's a remake of the original Nosferatu. Once again, this movie is rated R, and there are some explicit things in this movie that I don't recommend everybody to see. But that being said, this is a great movie about a very similar concept. Nosferatu, if you don't know, Nosferatu is effectively like Dracula. But in this movie, he is like explicitly demonic, and he comes very much like a demonic manifestation that's preying upon a young girl. And so it's a very creepy movie, and I think there's a lot of great conversations that we can open up here about trauma, sexual abuse, and that kind of thing. One of the things I really liked about Nosferatu is that in the movie, the demonic is taken seriously. Like, it's in Victorian England where a lot of people are skeptical about that kind of thing, but then when they contact Willem Dafoe's character, who's like a demon hunter or like an occultist, he's like, oh no, that's a demon. Like, he just straight up calls it out. He just straight up calls out what it is, and he's the only one who actually knows how to solve things. Also in the movie, the only people who really know how to solve these things and how to get past creatures like this is Orthodox Christians. And I really like that. If you watch the movie, like, there's like this Orthodox Christian, I think it's a monastery or a church, because I believe there are nuns there or something like that. Looks like there's a video from this guy about it. I don't know if this is good, but maybe I should check it out. Orthodoxy is treated very respectfully in this movie. And so I found that really interesting from a secular Hollywood film, that Christianity ultimately is the answer to fighting demons like Nosferatu. If you want me to cover The Witch or Nosferatu, please leave a comment in the comment section letting me know, and maybe I'll get around to it. Now we have a really controversial one. I think somebody criticized me for this one in the comment section one time before just because I mentioned it, but we have The Exorcist. The Exorcist is also rated R. I think that's mostly because there's some bad language in it and there's some graphic and explicit scenes in it. So again, don't recommend it for everybody. But one of the things I like about The Exorcist is that it highlights and it shows the dangers of messing around with spiritual things. This girl, I believe she plays around with a Ouija board, and she gets in contact with a demonic god. It's a deeply, deeply evil movie. One of the things I like about it is it really emphasizes that spiritual warfare and the fact that the demonic is real. You shouldn't mess with these things. You shouldn't take these things skeptically. In the end, there's a great message because only the name of Jesus Christ is really able to get the demon to go away. These Jesuit priests come, and they're the only guys who are able to come and get the demons to go away by calling upon the name of Jesus Christ. And interestingly, one of the priests actually ends up sacrificing himself to save the girl. And so you have a great message in there about self-sacrifice and Christian love. They really don't make horror movies like this anymore, where they focus on good themes and there's a good message at the end of it. Now, this movie, The Green Knight's kind of a weird movie. It actually came out quite recently in 2021. I've only seen it once, and I do need to rewatch it. This movie is a fantasy film. It's not an exact horror film, but I would call it kind of a dark fantasy film because there are a lot of really weird and creepy dark elements in this movie. The Green Knight is a much older story, and a lot of people didn't like the way that the story was changed for this modern rendition. But as somebody who's not deeply connected to the original story, I thought this movie was great, and I think that there might be some interesting Christian lessons we can learn from it. If that's something that any of you guys are interested in, please leave a comment letting me know. And of course, we have the best of the best, The Lord of the Rings. I could talk about The Lord of the Rings forever. This is something that we are going to cover on the channel sometime in the future. Don't even bother leaving me a comment letting me know that that's something you're interested in, because I'm going to cover these movies. These movies are 3 of my favorite movies of all time. I think they're amazing. I think one of the reasons that Christians can enjoy these movies is because they were written by a devout Christian. There's nothing bad or explicit in these movies that Christians ought to avoid. They're deeply Catholic to the core, and even if you aren't Catholic, you can still enjoy these movies. A lot of you may be wondering why I even included The Lord of the Rings in this video. How in the world could you consider this dark Christianity? Isn't The Lord of the Rings just high fantasy? And I would say you have a point, but there's a lot of dark fantasy elements throughout The Lord of the Rings, especially when you watch the movies. The scene where Gandalf fights the Balrog is spiritual warfare to a T. I mean, he's literally fighting a demon. If you know anything about Lord of the Rings, Gandalf is effectively like an angel, and the Balrog is like a demon, and so this is like an angel fighting a demon, and it's unbelievably metal. This is so heavy metal, it's unbelievable. In the same vein, you have the ring wraiths, these Nazguls, I think they call them, and these ring wraiths are after the rings the whole time, and so the characters are constantly trying to flee these dudes to get away from them. They're so creepy and dark looking. It's straight out of a Gothic painting. You also have this guy, Grima Wormtongue. This guy, Grima Wormtongue, is whispering these evil satanic things to King Theoden, and it's corrupting him and keeping him stuck here on the throne. Without getting political on the channel, because I never want to get political on this channel, I think this whole scene in Lord of the Rings is a good depiction about how sometimes our nation's leaders can be led astray by satanic influence. And the main bad guy in Lord of the Rings is a dark wizard who's under satanic influence. His name is Saruman the White, and he's under the influence of the Dark Lord Sauron. So ultimately, these Lord of the Rings movies are very heavy metal. There's some really cool fantasy battles all throughout these movies. And so I think that Christians can love and enjoy them. Moving on to some more dark, creepy, Gothic style movies. I really like a lot of Tim Burton movies. I've actually never really seen a Tim Burton movie that I didn't like, except for maybe The Corpse Bride. I didn't think The Corpse Bride was the best, but it was okay. A lot of Tim Burton movies are great. There's nothing explicitly Christian in these movies, but they're a great example of how you can have a dark, creepy, horror style movie without anything gross, explicit, or anything that you wouldn't want your kids to see, right? A lot of Tim Burton's movies are ultimately family friendly at the end of the day, even though they have that goth, creepy, dark aesthetic to them. And so that's what I think makes them really enjoyable. I love Nightmare Before Christmas, and I like the Batman movies especially. These first 2 Batman movies, which are the ones that Tim Burton made, are 2 of the best Batman movies. That was right before the series really went off the rails. These are some dark, creepy movies, and I would love to do some videos someday on Batman. If that's something that you guys are interested in, leave a comment letting me know. I'm a huge Batman fan. There's something about that dark world of Gotham City and Batman coming out of the shadows to defeat the enemies, which I think is awesome. And I think this would be a perfect transition to start talking about superheroes and comic book characters. If Batman's something you'd like me to cover, please let me know, because I'm a huge Batman fan. I've read a ton of different Batman comics, which I think would be great to cover on this channel. There's something mythical about Batman that I just haven't quite cracked the code on yet, and I would love to explore that more in upcoming videos. But if you want an explicitly Christian superhero, check out Daredevil. It's another example of something that's kind of dark and kind of edgy, but at the end of the day is deeply Christian. Daredevil himself as a character is Catholic. And when Daredevil was being written by Frank Miller, I believe, is also a Catholic. So Frank Miller did some of the most popular Daredevil comics ever written. And you have a lot of these scenes of him in Catholic churches, really exploring his Catholic faith. I haven't really read Daredevil very much, but I love the Daredevil TV series. Disney Plus recently continued it with Daredevil Born Again. I watched season 1. I didn't think it was the best. I haven't seen season 2 yet of Daredevil Born Again. My recommendation for you is to watch the first 3 seasons of Daredevil on Netflix. Those 3 seasons are explicitly Christian through and through. Now, there is going to be some violence, some sexual stuff, some explicit language, and some graphic stuff, and so I definitely don't recommend it for everybody. But at the end of the day, those 3 seasons, each one of them explores deeply Christian themes, and I would love to cover it someday on our channel if that's something that you guys would be interested in. The first 3 seasons of Daredevil on Netflix are perfect. They're great. He's maybe the most Christian superhero, with the exception of like maybe Nightcrawler from the X-Men. Moving on, we have Spawn. Spawn is not a Christian story, and Spawn is not a Christian himself. In fact, this series was actually written by a staunch atheist, Todd McFarlane. That being said, I think the whole Spawn story is one that's really fascinating from a Christian perspective. It's effectively a Faustian bargain, where he bargains with a demon to save himself, and it comes with a ton of consequences. I talked about Faustian bargains in my 𝐃𝐿 video, so if you want to watch our 𝐃𝐿 video, please make sure you click that link in the top right-hand corner of the video, or go to the channel and check it out. So even while I can acknowledge that Spawn is not a Christian story, I think it's something that Christians can enjoy because it focuses a lot on spiritual warfare and sin and the depravity of mankind. You have this creepy kind of demonic anti-hero who's sent by demons to go stop all that evil from occurring. And like I said, it's very much a Faustian bargain. Very similar to Ghost Rider. Ghost Rider is another one that I love. I like Ghost Rider actually more than Spawn. Once again, haven't really read the comics for this either. I haven't really read Spawn comics, but I did watch the Spawn cartoon, which was pretty good. Ghost Rider, I haven't read Ghost Rider comics either, but I did watch the first 2 movies that came out. Those movies are not great, but I think the first one is really fun. I don't remember anything in that first Ghost Rider movie that was explicit or gross or anything of a problem. I think it was just a good, kind of creepy, dark movie, but it's ultimately about this anti-hero Ghost Rider who once again kind of makes a Faustian bargain, very much like Spawn. He's working for the devil to send souls to hell. So he's going after bad guys and sending them to hell, and it's a really cool story. And it just goes to show you why you should not make deals with the devil. These are all cautionary tales. On the DC side of things, I actually just made a video on Swamp Thing 1999, issue number 1. So be sure to click the link in the top right-hand corner of the video if this is something that you want to check out. I've never really read Swamp Thing before, but my understanding of Swamp Thing is that he's kind of always explored mysterious spiritual things. I find those kind of comics to be way more interesting than your just standard superhero beat-em-up comics. I think that we should be exploring more spiritual warfare and stuff like that. And so I really enjoyed this comic, even though it was imperfect and there were some not so great things in it. I think that DC needs to be making more comics like this. And so Swamp Thing might be something to check out more of in the future. Venom is another one. Venom is one that I think we all just like because of the aesthetic. He's a really cool character to look at, very creepy. The Venom movie I really liked. I didn't like the second Venom movie. I thought that one was kind of bad, but Venom as a character is a really fascinating anti-hero. I don't know how much I feel about Venom being an anti-hero or being a hero at all. I think Venom is much more interesting to me as a villain because there's more can be said about the way that the Venom symbiote possesses people, kind of like demonic possession. I know I made a joke in one of my most recent videos about how Spider-Man 3 doesn't really exist and how we should all just kind of forget about it. But I'm not going to lie to you guys. As terrible as Spider-Man 3 is, the whole black suit Spider-Man thing is kind of fire. I mean, it's so dark. It's so heavy metal. The whole thing about Toby kind of getting infected with the symbiote and he slowly becomes kind of a bad guy. It's really fascinating. And I really like Spider-Man 3's Venom. the way that Eddie Brock, because of his character, because he's struggling a lot more than Peter Parker is, he doesn't have a good heart like Peter does. That Venom symbiote takes over Eddie so much more than it takes over Peter. You know, Peter could have possibly become like this had he not had a good heart. So I think I just prefer Venom more as a villain than I do like as a hero, because I think that more fascinating things can be said there about sin and, you know, the darkness within our own hearts. So yeah, Spider-Man 3 is not a great movie, but as a guy who likes black and the more like dark aesthetic, I do like Spider-Man 3. Next up we have God's Dog. Now I haven't read God's Dog, but I love Jonathan Pajot. Jonathan Pajot is an Orthodox Christian, and my understanding is that him and his brother came up with this whole comic book series that blends a lot of like Christian and like Old Testament Jewish like mythology into like this cool series. So this is something that I want to check out, and I think we need more comics written by Christians that are explicitly Christian stories. So God's Dog is something I think we should support because I want to see more stories like this. All right, next up, let's talk about music. I love dark, heavy music. For a very long time now, I've been a fan of hard rock, heavy metal, and anything in between. And so I like a lot of really heavy bands, but sometimes in that genre, you get a lot of bands who are explicitly satanic, very anti-Christian, or at the least, you know, maybe just kind of atheistic or secular. You get a lot of profanity, there's a lot of explicit songs, and these are the kind of things that we want to avoid as Christians. So maybe you like bands like Motionless in White, Black Veil Brides, Bring Me the Horizon, and trust me, I get it. You're not alone. I love these bands too. But the problem with that hard rock, heavy metal scene is that you get a lot of these bands who have, you know, explicitly anti-Christian or anti-religious songs. And we want to try to avoid that stuff as much as possible, and we want to try to avoid songs that have all that profanity in it. Back when I used to really be into thrash metal, for instance, Slayer was one of like the top thrash metal bands. Now, like Metallica and Megadeth, for instance, are great thrash metal bands, and there's very little wrong with them. But Slayer is explicitly satanic. Everything Slayer does is like so clearly satanic. And so it's like, how as Christians could we possibly support something like that? If you really like dark music or heavy music, there's a lot of great stuff out there that's like Christian. So I would recommend, for instance, the first Evanescence album. Evanescence is like hard rock, but that first album is explicitly Christian, and it's very cool. I think the most popular band is Skillet. Skillet has been on the top of the Christian hard rock and heavy metal scene for a long time. I love Skillet. Skillet is phenomenal. They do a lot of really good hard rock. If you want to check out their stuff, it's very accessible. They get played on the radio and stuff. Like Skillet Skillet does some of like the best Christian hard rock you could ever listen to. Now, if you want like super heavy, really dark deathcore, Impending Doom. Deathcore is like death metal mixed with metalcore. It's like some of the heaviest stuff you could possibly listen to. This is one of my favorite bands to listen to. These guys on the outside, they would look really scary. They would look really freaky. But at the end of the day, they're actually a Christian band, and they actually have a ton of really cool Christian lyrics all throughout their work. If you listen to interviews with these guys, they are explicitly Christians. I'm actually wearing an Impending Doom shirt right now. Their music, even though it's super dark and super heavy, it focuses on spiritual warfare, defeating demons, God triumphing over evil. Really cool stuff. Demon Hunter is the same kind of thing. Demon Hunter isn't as heavy to me as Impending Doom. Demon Hunter is more in like the metalcore genre. I absolutely love this band. Once again, these guys are explicitly Christians. They make no apologies about that. They have like very clear songs about their faith. They're not even trying to remotely hide it. Even the logo, Demon Hunter, they're making it very clear that they're all about like taking out demons, killing demons. That's what they do. And their music is so good. They're like one of the longest running bands I think I have on this list. They have so many albums. Demon Hunter is phenomenal. If you like old school death metal and you want more of that death metal stuff, might I try introducing you to life metal? Instead of death metal, listen to life metal. That's a joke, obviously. Mortification makes like Christian death metal, and they do a really good job. It's more of that old school sound, so it's like unpolished, more raw recording. Very dark, very heavy stuff, but explicitly Christian. Black Sabbath is kind of an interesting one. I think a lot of people would think about Black Sabbath as either non-religious or maybe even dark or satanic, possibly. Music fans will know that Black Sabbath was effectively the first metal band. They're like the first guys who really did heavy metal. And it's because it was kind of dark and creepy music. But when you really listen to their music, there's nothing in it that like glorifies evil or praises evil. A lot of their songs are actually about how evil really is, about how evil the demons are, and how Satan like deceives people and he twists and he tempts people. On one of their albums, they have an explicitly Christian song that like says very clearly that they're Christians. If you do research about these guys or some of the things that they got into later in life, you'll find that they were not perfect. They got into drugs and alcohol and all kinds of creepy occult things. And so I don't fully condone Black Sabbath, the members and the things that they got into later in life, but the music is really fire. You're not really going to see anything in here that's like explicit or anti-Christian or satanic. It's dark, it's creepy, it's gothic, but I really like the music, and I think that a lot of the songs have to do with like spiritual warfare and not getting deceived by Satan and the devil. Another super heavy band is Cultist. Cultist is kind of a newer band I've been listening to. They're more in that like metalcore, hardcore scene. Very heavy stuff, but once again, explicitly Christian, great music. Lately, I've been listening to a lot of Magdalene Rose. It's kind of hard to explain Magdalene Rose. She's not like standard metalcore. She mixes a lot of electronic stuff in her music. It kind of reminds me of like Under Oath or Bring Me the Horizon. But once again, Christian. A lot of her songs have to do with faith and her relationship with God, struggling with sin and that kind of stuff. So I've really been listening to her new album a lot lately. And if any of you want more Christian metal or hard rock, I recommend checking out Kingdom Core. Kingdom Core is on YouTube. He's on Instagram and the website. Kingdom Core is a really great community for like Christian metalheads, and they'll introduce you to a ton of really cool heavy bands. And now on to video games. Last but not least, video games. Let's talk about some of the best Christian video games out there, or video games that I think Christians can enjoy. The big problem here is that I'm not much of a gamer. I don't play that many games, and so it's not like I'm really that well versed in all these different video games. So I'm just going to talk about some of my favorite ones and some of the ones that I've heard are really good for Christians to play. I of course love Doom. I made a Doom video, and it's like the most popular video on my channel, and I got a lot of flack from people and a lot of criticism from people because of it. At the end of the day, Doom, especially the original one in 2016's Doom, is just a game about going around killing demons. Like, you play as a good guy who goes around and kills demons. And so even though it's violent and it's graphic, I love it. It's really cool. You play as a good guy, and it feels like you're doing spiritual warfare the whole game. It's so fun. I'm aware of the fact that in Doom Eternal and in Doom the Dark Ages, they introduced a lot of like weird lore elements that blends into like Gnosticism and some creepy stuff that we haven't covered yet on the channel. I've gotten a lot of criticism because of that, but my first video was literally only about Doom 2016 to begin with. And so in the future, we might cover Doom Eternal. I would like to cover it so we can talk about some of that Gnostic stuff that they brought in. This is not a game made by Christians. It is a game made by atheists, and so they are bringing in some weird stuff into the series later in the series. But I think that the original Doom and Doom 2016 are both solid games. Castlevania is another one that I really haven't played much of. I played a little bit, I think, of like one of the original Castlevania games. It's another like creepy kind of gothic dark game about a guy, and I think he's like going after a vampire, so you're going through a castle kind of like Dracula's Transylvania castle, and you're trying to like go after a vampire, and so it has like cool gothic dark aesthetic. There's nothing like explicitly Christian about it though. Same with these next few games. Nothing explicitly Christian about like the Dark Souls games, but you are like a knight, I think, in these games. I haven't played them, but like you do go after like the forces of evil, and you're trying to defeat the forces of evil. Same with Bloodborne. Bloodborne takes place in kind of a different world, but these games are all about like fighting dark, creepy, demonic monsters and going after them. These next few games I'm talking about do actually have some religious like influence in them. Like these Diablo games, you actually do fight demons and stuff like that. Never played them, but I think that they're interesting because you fight demons, and there's kind of like a religious element to it. Same with Darksiders. I believe Darksiders, they actually have like Horsemen of the Apocalypse in there. Some stuff from like Revelation. So this is blending like biblical lore into video games. So it's something I've been wanting to check out more of. And of course you have Shadow of Mordor and Shadow of War. These are games that take place within Middle-earth. So it's part of the Lord of the Rings universe. And so if you like those Lord of the Rings movies and you're interested in that kind of universe, I think these games are really cool. And so that's pretty much all I got. This whole purpose of this video is to focus on this aesthetic that I want to see more of, called dark Christianity. Some people call it Gothic Christianity, but I don't think that's a great name for it. I want to see more music, video games, movies, TV shows, books, and stuff like that all coming out, written by Christians, made by Christians, for people who like this kind of stuff. I think a lot of the art and entertainment we see that comes out that has that more dark edge to it are made by people who are atheists or people who are not Christian, and so it's often filled with a ton of problems. But I want to see more Christians get into making comic books and making music and stuff like that, so we can try to fill this world with Christian truth And we can hide that Christian truth in stuff that the world is going to like. I think 21 Pilots does a good job at doing that. I think bands like Demon Hunter and Impending Doom do a good job at doing that. They're packaging Christian truth into things that people are going to enjoy. And what better way to do that than to appeal to people who like darker aesthetics like me? If you like this video, please be sure to hit that like button and leave a comment letting me know what you think. What is your favorite piece of entertainment that you might be able to consider dark Christian? And do you think I'm totally off on some of this stuff? Don't forget to like and subscribe, and thanks for watching.